We are now recording. Okay, Pike, how are you?
Oh,
Tell me about your day.
I'm fine. I have a day off, and here you are dragging me into the studio to just do this, and it's like it's Babel. Do we have to? It's
Okay,
Babel, sir.
you got to not talk about the studio because then people won't think we have an excuse for our really poor production quality. So you got to pretend like we're doing this out of a cardboard box, which is approximately the quality of these streams. Okay, just
I
just
mean,
just we got to set up proper standards here. But yes, we're
okay.
talking
First
about.
off, no. I'm gonna take you to task for calling it a stream. We're not even doing this live. This is just a video. That's the stand. It's further down. If you want low standards, then be honest about the standards here, sir.
Okay, that's
Uh,
fair. That's fair. You know, you hurt me, but that's fair.
um,
Well, anyway,
I
we could
do it
talk
because
about
I love.
Babel. We could talk about Babel now.
Yeah, we can.
All right,
This
so
episode.
I think we're gonna give a small overview here. Uh, so I gave this episode. I think I gave it a rewatch just right now, like before the stream, and it might be better than I thought. But right now, I in my notes I have it as a overall C. I call it a skippable episode, and I think it's probably the
Yeah,
first skippable episode.
yeah, like there is stuff with certain characters here where it's like people are like I would say like, hey, if you want to get a good handle for this character in particular, it's like watch this episode, but you don't necessarily need it to get a handle of that character. It is a C for me. Like I'll give you guys the briefest of just statements. It's the sort of like hokey sort of Star Trek fare. You know how like every season has episodes where they're not bad, but they're just like a plot. That's a plot, and it's just a week like just a sort of like episode of the week situation.
Yeah, when we
Like
looked at our
yeah,
previous episodes, obviously we have Emissary. Then we have I forget what the episode after that is called. The episode after that is
past
called Past
prologue.
Prologue. Yep. Then we have A Man Alone. Past Prologue is a Kira episode. A Man Alone is an Odo episode. This isn't really an
Real
anybody episode. There's a few good scenes the characters have. O'Brien, Odo, Quark are kind of the standouts, I would say.
yeah.
And
Uh,
but other than
There's
that,
also
there's something about this episode. The central idea, and we'll talk about the central idea. It really kind of hurts the ability of the actors to actually act, and I
when
think
they
that's
have to.
well,
But
yeah. So the premise, we'll just give a small brief down of the premise. It's called Babel because something happens to the station that causes a disease which screws up people's ability to speak and comprehend language. So
mhm.
suddenly you have characters who are saying these this nonsense gibberish words that like somewhat reflects what they're trying to say in terms of like the pacing of the speaking from what you got from your notes, but otherwise it's just
Yeah.
random words that have no real meaning. So the actors are trying to like communicate with each other and they can't. That's part of the disease, and there's other aspects of the disease that we'll go into, but it's like when the actors can't actually talk or communicate. Like there's a scene we're going to talk about between like Jake and Cisco, and like we understand Cisco, but we can't understand Jake because he's been infected. And
Hmm.
it's like, oh, Cisco's having this really meaningful conversation with his son. His son can't respond in any way. So it's a really
Yeah.
weird. It's. I don't know how well this really like will carry over. Like when we talk about it, it's like, yeah, sure, like the characters are acting, they're emoting fairly well, but when I don't really
There's
know
some
what some characters are trying to, yeah,
there's physical intimacy, but without the language there, it's a little
and it,
rougher on it.
it's also a little funny because Jake can't understand any of it. So Cisco's saying these really
Well,
meaningful things to his son, and his son is just like, what? like,
no. He's fish.
yeah, he's like fish, pond space. It's like he's just saying random words, and it's like, man, it's really hard to take that seriously sometimes. Because again, it's like if you're trying to imagine it from Jake's point of view, he's listening to Cisco give this really meaningful speech, and to him, it's gibberish. And from a meta
Yeah, it,
perspective, we're just like, oh my god, this is kind of dumb. But I don't think
yeah.
this episode's bad. Like it has pretty good pacing. It has very like good cause and effect. We can kind of start with the opening scene, which I do like the opening scene. It's sort of a cold open with O'Brien going about the ship, fixing a lot of small things. He's trying to
Hmm.
keep like there's these people on the other side of a door from a docking bay. The door's busted, so they can't get through. And then
Yeah.
another guy goes up to complain him, saying that because they're behind on maintenance, he can't get his ship off the dock, and he hasn't been scheduled to leave yet. And
Hmm.
Kira then complains about her computer not working. Cisco complains about the replicator not working, and O'Brien's going from object to object fixing them. And I like this because it kind of shows O'Brien as this everyman who's constantly like he's not he's not like the Starfleet engineers. He's the repair guy, and he's very
Well,
good at his job. You know, he go like I know he has an engineering degree, but like I guess what I mean is he's not like Geordi from TNG, who
he's
is
the
like,
enlisted guy who keeps things actually
yeah.
running
I mean,
behind the scenes while
Jordy was the guy who's like, oh, I'm redeveloping the warp coils to add 0.5% more efficiency to our, faster than light travel. Meanwhile, O'Brien's like, hey guys, I got the toilets working. And like
I
both of
got
these are
your
obviously
structural
super
integrity. like like Jordy's the one who makes the advancement, but O'Brien is the person who makes sure his advancements don't tear apart the ship.
Yeah, and one thing I like
He's
about
the
this is we see a lot of this later in the series, but O'Brien is like the number one factor keeping this station functioning. When he
Oh
leaves, or
God,
when
yeah.
I remember there's an episode where he goes on like a break and everything just starts falling apart because it's just
Yep.
and this is just one of those episodes to show, yeah, he's repairing the docking bays, he's repairing the replicators, he's repairing the computers, and he does it super quick and efficiently that it's actually kind of scary. Like at one point, Kira's
Yeah.
like, "There's a problem with the computer." He goes underneath, fiddles with some wires and some couplings or whatever it is that Star Trek uses for technology, and it's like, there, it's fixed. And it's like, it's just a nice little scene. We sort of see sort of the day to day of O'Brien, but it very quickly leads to one thing because after Cisco complains about the replicator being broken, they show O'Brien fixing the
Hmm.
replicator on one of the levels, and then they pan over to some device that seems to be hooked up to the inner workings of the replicator that has then activated, and then we get the opening
Yep.
cutscene. So it's like something's going on. We don't know what it is. And from there, it's like this is the primary setup. That is a booby trap. We don't know who left the booby trap right now. We don't know what it
Hmm.
does. But the next scene we have, and again, there's a lot of good setup scenes in this. So Odo is mocking Quark for his bad business. Let's see if I can get some visuals here. Oh yeah, there was one scene we forgot to talk about. It was kind of funny where Jadzia needs O'Brien's help to fix something in her room, and she's not telling him what it is. He gets there, they open the door, and there's just really just loud, high pitched screeking,
Oh,
and it actually
yeah.
hurts her ears. And she's like, "Can you guess what the problem is?" So he doesn't. Again, he doesn't even know what it is. He just walks up to a computer, fixes it in like 30 seconds, and
No, no, no. He does state like what the problem probably is, because he's like he says the second is probably the secondary phase modulator. We had issues with them last week in the main power core. This should do it, and it does do it. It's like
Well,
he
I know, but I guess the issue is he's kind of almost guessing what it is. He has such experience with the station and what's going on. He can kind of listen to a problem that Jadzia doesn't even know what's causing it, and immediately be like, "Yeah, it's probably this." Like he just
Mm.
walks in, solves it. He diagnoses the problem and solves it immediately. So it's pretty nice.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
then we
mhm.
get to, but then after that we have the opening scene, and we get to Quark's, and we have a fun little Quark Odo scene where Quark, his replicators are apparently busted, and a customer's kind of pissed because the food he got is disgusting. He threatens Quark by saying like, look, if you made it, so you're gonna eat it. Odo then steps in and keeps Quark safe, pushes this
Yeah,
guy away, which I think is the guy's name Asoth, or is that his species? No, his name is Asoth.
that yeah, soft.
Yeah, because I don't think we ever really do. We know what his species is? I'm trying to like get a picture of him. Yeah, I don't know what
Uh,
exactly he is. He's
let me
something in
look
Star
him
Trek.
up.
It's not a big deal.
Markalian, Markalian, or yeah, it's Markalians. Yeah.
Doesn't really matter.
Uh,
But so then Quark mentions that his replicators are on the fritz, and Odo tells him like you should probably get O'Brien to fix them, and Quark has to mention that he's on the waiting list. Which again,
mhm.
it's nice to know that like the only person who could fix this stuff is O'Brien. He probably has a full team of people, but he's the only one who can do it. So there's a waiting list for his attention.
Mhm, mhm,
And
mhm.
I think it's also probably, I don't know, maybe a very small important bit of world building that the recreational replicators are lower tier on the list than maybe actually important systems.
Yeah,
That's the small little details like that. Keep sort of the world tight. Like there's no reason why Quarks is a priority.
right.
So
It's not.
yeah, and then
There
Odo,
are.
yeah, you were gonna
Go
say.
ahead. Sorry. Well, I was just gonna say it's like yeah, like the primary function of the station is it is a trading post and a way station, basically at this point between the Gamma Quadrant and Alpha Quadrant. So the priority should always be keeping ops running and keeping any ships coming and going in the stuff to let them dock and such. Keep that running.
Mhm.
Everything else is secondary. in their
Yep.
mind. So it's like, yeah, Quark would end up secondary, maybe
Yeah.
tertiary.
It makes sense. And from there, Odo sort of lets loose that O'Brien had fixed one of the let's see, what does he say? He says some other replicators were fixed earlier that day from a different level. I'm trying to think of like where he says it. I'm trying to look in the thing. He's on the command level. He has the replicators working on the command level perfectly. Odo then leaves, and this is a hilarious scene. Korg asks for a station layout to try and find where more replicators are on the command level. And then he goes
The
into his little
repaired one.
box. Yeah, he goes into his box and pulls out a bunch of security clearance like devices that
Yeah,
he just
like
has for
he
everybody.
Well, yeah, like so. What is specifically is like, hey, is information restricted to security clearance 5 and above? Please enter security verification. Quark is the information dealer, and it makes perfect sense as the information dealer on the station, the one who's like outside the chain of command, who deals with criminal elements and the official element. It's like, yeah, he would collect these, and that's something that's kept consistent, if I recall, because there's another point later in the series where there's something that Odo's trying to get access to, and he doesn't have high enough security clearance, and Quark's like, "Oh yeah, I've got that." It's like, why do you have that? It's like, I mean, it's Quark. What do you expect?
I just
Like,
like to
it's for
imagine that. I just like to imagine that he got like somehow duplicates of all the main characters' security codes, and he just has them in these little box. So he has like one labeled like Jadzia, one labeled Bashir, one labeled Cisco, and it's just like
uh,
whatever security clearance he needs, he's just gonna pop that right in.
yeah, yeah.
I just find it funny. It's a neat little detail. We know Quark is a pretty like criminal guy, pretty scummy guy at this point. So the fact that he just keeps security clearance for everyone in a box under his bar is kind of funny to me.
Hmm.
But so this is more setup. Let's see. After that, we get to okay. We're in the promenade. Let's see what was happening here. I'm trying to like see because we haven't
No,
had the
so
actual
you
like
skipped
plot
something,
happen. Oh,
sir.
what did I skip? What did I skip?
You you skipped a scene in
Oh,
Ops where we
yeah,
first get because O'Brien had ordered a cup of coffee earlier,
yeah,
and they're like, Cisco knows he's kind of seems tired, and he's like, O'Brien said, but eventually. He's going to walk off to do something, and Cisco's like, "Hey, say hi to your wife. Jake tells me she's a wonderful teacher." And O'Brien says for the first time, "That's nice to hear, sir. She's flower units about the lad himself. I
yeah,
mean
yeah. So
herself."
this is where they sort of think that maybe O'Brien's overworkedness is actually affecting his ability to communicate. Because after he says that, he immediately is fine after that. He says, "Oh, she's
Yeah.
quite fond of the lad herself." So there's this level of it's not fully affecting him, but this is like the first sign of what the disease is going to do. And yeah, so there's that scene.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I also like the scene. I think we get a few good scenes between O'Brien and Cisco throughout the season. That sort of there's stuff that they sort of share. They're both fathers. They're both sort of family men, but they're also very much I believe Cisco's an engineer, so they both have engineering degrees, right? There's a lot
Yeah,
of
he
things
was
about
originally an engineer. It's
yeah.
brought up
So
later on in the series.
I think there's a lot of cool things that they sort of share that are similar, and it's kind of interesting that O'Brien, being kind of the lowest rank of the main cast in terms of Starfleet characters,
Hmm.
is has so much in common with the highest ranked character in the series. I don't know. Small details. It's a small little detail. It's a nice little thing, sort of showing that Cisco doesn't think of himself like above O'Brien, but O'Brien doesn't always. O'Brien sort of considers himself just as important as a lot of the other people. I think
Yeah.
it sort of shows
Yeah.
the
Plus,
equality between them.
it also makes it more understanding when, like, if O'Brien's ever like, "Oh, I can get this done in 8 hours," and Siko's like, "You'll do it in 2." It's like that seems like a major downgrade for O'Brien. But here's the thing: he was an engineer. He knows buffer time. He knows
True,
buffer time.
true. Buffer time. So then we move back onto the promenade, and
Hmm.
we see oh, that's right. So Kira and Jadzia are having a conversation. I'm trying to see if this conversation was anything important. Jadzia is just sort of talking about the difference between I think being male and female in this context. Because someone was flirting
Uh,
with her, and Kira is like, it's like, oh yeah, no. Jadzia talks about how different it was being, how different it is. Kira's asking, oh, about
he
what?
gets
And
all the
Jadzia's like,
attention.
yeah.
Yeah.
Jazzy is talking about like, oh, it's so much different being a woman than it was a man. So they have a small little conversation like that, and then we move to Quark's, where it shows that hey, Quark's business is booming. He's getting all his food again, despite the fact that his replicators haven't been fixed. Gee, I wonder what's going on.
Hmm. I wonder
And,
what's going on.
yeah, and Quark's just sort of playing it off. He's like, hey, we're celebrating the repair of my replicators. Can I interest you in some Idaean spice pudding or whatever the hell that is?
Nice double with Idanian spice pudding.
Yeah.
There we go.
So
Idanian. That's
Kira,
how I say.
who's not a big fan of Quark, she's just like, yeah, I'm going back to ops. Meanwhile, Jadzia's like, I'm here.
That's a
And
Ferengi. Ferengis are fun.
yep. So she's a lot more laid back. She's a lot more willing to hang out with Quark in his place. And then let's see. Oh yeah, we get back to O'Brien. He's looking sicker. He's looking worse for wear. Kira wants to like talk to him, and this is where we finally get the thing where O'Brien is no longer making sense. None of his
Yeah,
words.
major.
At first he says, "Oh no, I'm fine, really," and then his next response is major lack true pepper. And it's at this point,
Larks.
okay, who cares? Lark's true pepper, whatever. And this is so we then get to the infirmary, and we learn that it's not just that O'Brien can't form complete sentences; he also can't type them either. He tries typing something, and it's just his babble. He types something on the pad, and it just says "flame the dark true, salt way link, complete strike." Like none of these words, like sentences, make sense. So this is where they sort of conclude that the part of his brain that interprets language is somehow being screwed up by something. And
Yeah.
he doesn't understand what anyone else is saying either. So he's just as confused. And let's see. Yeah, so Bashir basically needs to study what's going on, if he's been infected by something, because he's like, it's some sort of aphasia. They don't know if it's from an infection. They don't know if he suffered a head injury. They don't know what could have happened. So this is like the first part of the mystery, where we don't know what exactly is wrong with O'Brien, and no one knows how serious to take this, because it could be permanent, it could be temporary.
Hmm.
And then we get back. Cisco's introduced to the scene when they go back to ops, and yeah, a lot of this episode is really just going back and forth, characters trying to figure out more and more information. uh
Hmm.
Bashir is busy most of this episode doing his examinations. And let's see here. Oh, let's see. This is where it starts off with Bashir talking about like he hasn't found the issue, and eventually Dax, during this conversation, she seems a little bit more distracted, and this part of the scene ends with her also now being unable to speak.
Yeah, and well, Bashir at least like narrows it down to it's some sort of like aphasia, which if you don't know what aphasia is, class, it's basically a dysfunction where either it's difficult for you to communicate properly, uh, like basically you're unable to express something or understand others as
Yeah,
it is in this episode, or there's also spatial aphasia where basically you have trouble perceiving what you should normally be able to perceive. It's not blindness per se. It's a case of for some reason like that what you're supposed to be perceiving is getting written out and
well,
you're
yeah.
unable
The
to.
information's getting to the brain, but the brain's not organizing it properly. And
Right.
I think like the thing that makes the scene, like the thing that progresses the scene, is Bashir is very concerned because he's never heard of a form of contagious aphasia. Again, they were thinking
Yeah.
like O'Brien maybe hit his head or he got zapped with electricity at some point, and they're trying to like figure out the thing. But once Dax starts showing these same symptoms, Bashir is even more confused. And
Yep.
to kind of like, because we have a little bit more information in the crew, you can pretty much figure out at this point that the replicator that we saw the device on,
Did something.
it had the trap, and after O'Brien fixed it, he ordered I think like a Ractigino or a coffee from it or something and drank it.
Coffee double
Yeah,
black.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's when he got infected. And then Quark went to this same replicator because his replicators were broken and got all of his food and drink from the replicator, which then has now infected anyone who went to Quark's. We saw Dax hanging out at Quark's, so now she's infected.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
again, one of the things I do like about this episode is there's a very strong cause and effect here. But then,
Hmm.
surprise, surprise, everyone on the promenade starts getting infected. Part of this is because of Quark, but then Bashir does a scan of the air, and it turns out, guess what, guys? It's airborne now. I
Yeah,
don't
it's
know if that's exactly how
very
diseases work, but there's also a manufactured disease from a trap. So I'm willing to kind of just hand wave it away.
so I have issues with it being able to be like mutated that if it's manufactured, because here's the sort of issue that comes up with that is basically if this is manufactured, it's some sort of weapon, right?
Yeah,
You don't want that weapon to used against your own people, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Like it's sort of just like it's one of the things of whenever we do something with studying like viruses and such, we try to be careful about how it might like mutate as we're experimenting and such. And it's like, oh, like this did it so fast, and this is supposed to be a weapon. Now there's an explanation that I'm thinking of right now that might explain it, but we'll wait to when we get to the origin of the virus for me to explain that. Like
yeah, and I
why it's
think,
capable.
yeah, I think one thing I find. Let's see. I was gonna say something. I might have lost it. So let's see. What was we were talking about the aphasia, the Quark's bar. I can't.
Mhm,
I think I lost it. It doesn't. It's not a big deal. Either way, so Cisco calls a quarantine of the station immediately. They don't know what this is. They just know it's a virus. They know it's airborne. It's going to affect
mhm,
everyone on the station.
mhm,
And I think I do remember kind of what we were saying. Clearly, from what we've seen from O'Brien, it does seem to have an effect on people other than just the not being able to communicate or understand language anymore. O'Brien looks
mhm,
tired. I think he starts developing a fever, and eventually he's so sick he can't even move. He's sort of doing the standard lie in bed and writhe in pain sort of situation. And now that
uh-huh.
everyone on the station's
The
kind of being infected with this, now it's a huge emergency.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Everyone's
obviously,
gonna
yeah,
skip Friday.
yeah,
Everyone's gonna
obviously,
skip
Odo
Friday.
being a changeling is not affected by this. But when Odo leaves the promenade, this is after the quarantine is called. It's very quiet except for Quark's bar. I actually do like this scene. Odo goes over to
Hmm.
Quark's bar, and Quark is just sort of playing Dabble by himself because he doesn't have anything else to do. I think this is where they explain that Ferengis have the heightened immune system.
Hmm.
It might have been,
Which
yeah.
I
I mean,
suppose would
sure.
make sense because they're the trade people and they're constantly just being exposed to new stuff. So it's like,
I
yeah,
don't know if
like
that's not necessarily that much of a good thing because a lot of species do that, especially like humans. I think it would just be more like we can just sort of write it off as something Ferengi have. They have a heightened immune
uh
system. It's like there's no reason to assume they wouldn't. Like I imagine some species have weakened immune systems. It could be like Quarians from Mass Effect, or they could be, just like, oh yeah, I can kind of go anywhere and never be affected by any pathogen ever. I don't think that's what Ferengi are. They do get sick. I think we
oh
see them get sick eventually,
yeah,
but
raw.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's
But
like, first off, there's almost no point in quarantine on a space station. I mean, the point of the quarantine is to stop ships from entering or leaving the station, not really to
yeah,
stop people from going about the station. But at the same time, people still seem to be, I guess, staying in their quarters because they don't want to risk extra additional exposure. I don't really
right.
know. I don't really know exactly how that would work, considering all the air on a space station would be recycled essentially. So unless they can
Hmm.
filter for this disease, and remember that was an issue they had earlier. Like diseases are tend to not going to get on the station, mostly because of either transporters or docking procedures are going to account for all these sorts of things.
Hmm.
So they're trying to figure out, okay, where did this disease even come from? And Quark, for some reason he's just immune, but he and Odo have a nice little conversation. You know, Odo basically is like, looks business as usual, and Quark is like, yeah, except let's see, except for essential station operations, which Quark considers his bar. He's like, yeah, with the quarantine, everyone's on edge. You need to have some harmless diversion, but no one wants to show up to the bar. Uh, and this is where
Except
something like,
for
yeah, oh, sorry, yeah, Asath is at the bar and he's eating some stew. He says it's magnificent. Uh, and Quark says, "Oh yeah, my assistant Rom, he was able to fix the replicators." And Odo just sort of gives him a side eye, like, "Ah, yes, very fortunate. Like, isn't it good
yeah,
for you
which
that your replicators suddenly started working again?"
when you needed O'Brien earlier to fix them, and he has been busy or sick the whole time. Hmm.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
I find this interesting because we kind of get to we're gonna get to something that we know is gonna be retcon later, but apparently Rom can fix the replicators, and that's suspicious to Odo.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
he's a idiot.
yeah.
He's an
We then
idiot.
have a small scene with Jake and Cisco. Jake's sort of like looking sadly over the promenade because no one's there. He's like, "Oh yeah, Nog. Let's see. Oh yeah." Cisco's like, "I expected you home an hour ago." Jake's like, "Yeah, I was at Nog's." Uh, and Cisco's like, look, it's a precaution for this quarantine and something more. He's trying to like alleviate his son's worry.
Yeah.
And then
You know,
we get one of the guys from the opening scene, Jahil. He's one of the people who wanted to leave the station, but he wasn't allowed to because of the docking procedures. He's complaining that his cargo is going to spoil if he doesn't leave soon, and that he needs to go. That none of his crew are infected, and he should be allowed to leave, but Cisco can't allow it because of the quarantine. So
right.
again, more setting up for things later. It's very straightforward. And
Mhm.
let's see. Oh yeah, this is where we sort of get the full reveal. So Quark goes to where he gets the food trolley, and he brings the food trolley and he goes to the replicator that he's been using
It's an
on the command
empty
level,
quarter. Yeah.
and he goes to the replicator, produces an order, and then the trolley morphs into Odo. And Quark says something funny. He's like, I felt like the front wheel was sticking a bit. And Odo's like, yeah, this is unauthorized access to crew quarters. It's a crime. You could have just asked to use the replicators. And Quark has an old Ferengi saying, never ask when you can take. And how
Yeah.
did you figure it out? And Odo's like, you claimed Rom fixed the replicators, and Rom's an idiot. So
He
Rom
couldn't
doesn't
fix
stay
a
in.
straw
Rom
if it's bent.
he
Just
couldn't fix a straw if it was spent. That's a pretty funny. That's a pretty funny line. But Rom later on in the series becomes very intelligent. So maybe this is a bit of maybe,
that's a
it could be
retcon.
it could be that Odo is just looking down upon Rom, and maybe Rom doesn't have the confidence to do what he does later in the series. I don't know, but I do think it's a little bit of a retcon because Quark is also like, you're right, Rom's an idiot. Remind me to get rid of him tomorrow. I don't know. It's just some of the back and forth between Quark and Odo is always just fun because there's like this weird friendly hostility between them.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, one of the things sort of in the background is the fact that Armin Shermerman, the actor for Quark, actually really likes this episode, and it's because, as he says, this is where he gets a handle on Quark as a character. He knows what he's doing. He before this he did very well as Quark. Like Quark is our first exposure to basically the revamped Ferengi for DS9, and so far it was great. But here like Armin is just like, yeah, this is where I know for certain what I'm doing with Quark the whole time, and like it's I I I would say like yeah, he knows what he's doing. He's doing it well. You know, while the episode as a whole is a C, I would put Quark here and his relationship with Odo, their back and forth as like an A. We now are getting like really into them of like what this relationship is and how it's going to be for the rest of the series. Yeah.
Yeah. The next scene is the ops, and it's mostly just going over stuff we've already talked about. The virus is airborne. They figured out it's coming from the replicators. They do point out that approximately 60% of DS9's population has contacted the aphasia virus. And one thing I do like is we're actually sort of seeing a lot of the station no longer really able to function. There's a lot less people on the command deck. There's less people going around. They're probably struggling to keep this station running when so many people are getting sick. So I do kind of like
Hmm.
that as a little side detail. They could have ignored it, but it's probably very important to show that because it becomes a plot point later that there's really just no one to operate the station once everyone's sick. And
Yeah.
the only people who can operate are the people who aren't getting sick, which is we'll see it's Odo and Quark. So they have to actually operate the station because everyone else is incapable of functioning at that point.
Yep.
And
Yep.
this is when afterwards they find, because they're investigating the replicators, Kira finds the pattern replicator generator. It was a trap that was apparently placed there. They believe it was sabotage, and they're talking to each other. It's like, oh, is it Cardassian? Like Kira assumes it's Cardassian sabotage, and Cisco's a
Yeah,
little
because
bit
of power
questioned.
source.
Yeah, because of the power source, which is a diboridium power core, which is used in Cardassian technology. And this is a little bit of a spoiler. We're just gonna jump ahead. This trap was put there by the Bajorans using Cardassian technology.
Yeah, it was a part of the resistance.
Yeah, and it was put there long before. It just was never activated. We're going to learn a little bit more about that, but it was accidentally triggered. It was basically a dead man switch that had never been disabled, and now it's
Yeah.
affecting the station. It was because remember, this was originally a Cardassian station. It was meant to take down the Cardassians.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is where I think I kind of want to get into a little bit of discussion about the nature of this virus, because I mean we kind of already talked about the nature of how not allowing the actors to communicate I think does kind of hurt this episode to a degree. As
Yeah.
the episode goes on, we can't get certain actors anymore. O'Brien really can't contribute anymore. Jadzia can't really contribute anymore.
Hmm.
Bashir gets infected soon. He's really not able to contribute anymore. and eventually then Cisco gets it. So it's
Yep.
like as the episode goes on, you could write an episode like that works, of course, but with them not able to communicate, with them not really able to, you know, present information in a way that's both meaningful and also well acted, you know,
Hmm.
I think it hurts the episode overall. But when we're talking about the nature of the virus from like a plot perspective, so we
Hmm.
had this conversation when we watched this. If you were trying to get a virus to infect the command members of a station and kill them all, you're not
Hmm.
going to want any visible tell, you know? And this is a very visible tell that something is wrong.
Yes. Yeah, it's very aggressive. Now it does cut down on the ability to communicate and find a solution to it, but it's very visible. What I so I going back to what I said about the mutation sort of angle, I think they were ready for this. Either it's gonna work immediately and like just
Yeah,
ruin everything.
we've seen that in Star Trek before. Viruses that work within a very short period of time.
Yeah, so I think the reason why it's able to mutate is twofold. One, they wanted to mutate and become even more aggressive because it's like, oh, once the station's destroyed, it's gone, right? But
Yeah.
two, it's the Bajoran resistance. They don't have the controls in place to stop it. But yeah, so with how aggressive it is and like, how just dangerous it is, I think it's a case of like, for them, they weren't really thinking of like long term. They're just like at the very least, it's going to cause problems for a few days. And at the very most, it destroys the whole station, which here it almost does with the situation that happens.
So do you think they never intended for it to be deadly, just for it to basically disrupt communications and operations?
Um, that is a possibility that wasn't supposed to be necessarily like the killing factor. But I think it's like I think it's a case of like they had like two ideas in mind. Either it's gonna kill you from its natural effects of it eventually becoming just a very aggressive virus that attacks whatever parts of your body it attacks, or the communication issues that arise will kill you.
Yeah,
I think I
but I think
either
those
way.
work against each other, and because it's a synthetic virus. Look, I mean, I don't know anything about synthetic viruses here. I don't know anything about Star Trek's ability, like Bajoran's ability to create a synthetic virus. We do get a scene later
We're
that talks
social
about how
science majors.
well, uh, we talk about how the Bashir later brings up that he's actually questioning the origins of this trap because he doesn't think it's Cardassian, and part of that is because he doesn't
Yeah.
think the Cardassians have the advanced genetic engineering abilities. That's just, I guess, something that they didn't spec in their Civ build. But it's
Well,
like
no, no, no.
The Bajorans do have this level of sophistication with virus development. And I guess like my issue with that is, look,
Mm,
if you ever played like
mm,
the Plague Incorporated game, it's like you want your virus to be as unnoticeable as possible prior to you making it as deadly as possible. That's how you win that game. So here,
yeah.
making
So
a virus that's I'll let you go. Just let me finish the one thought. It's like to make a virus, if it's intended to be deadly, the fact that it has this very obvious tell goes against its purpose.
yeah. So I'm gonna correct you on something you said. He doesn't say that, oh, they don't have this ability, and that's why he doubts it. He says, uh, Cisco says you're saying he mentions that, oh, it's too perfect, it's clearly not natural. Cisco says, so you think the Cardassians genetically engineered it? Bashir says, that's what I thought at first, but I've studied their genetic engineering and such. They always build distinctive monoclonal links into their DNA, for the virus, and the virus does not have those features, which means, oh, this is not a Cardassian thing. Like, or at least it
Okay.
hints that it's not saying Cardassians made because it's like,
Well,
now they
I
might
mean,
have said this up to,
after
but
this, Bashir. I know I'm looking at the transcript. Bashir is pretty
mm,
confident in who he says created it. He's like, because Cisco asks who created it, Bashir responds, "The Bajorans, sir." And
yeah,
I guess
because
like I
based on
remember
record.
we
Yeah.
did have a conversation about this where I'm like, I don't know how accurate you could really be in that assessment. I mean, I guess like it's who cares who created it at the end of the day. Well, they actually use that information to find someone to help them cure it, but I guess it's more of
Yeah.
an issue of like, okay, so I guess Cardassians always build a very distinctive feature into the DNA of the viruses they make, and then I'm just sort of sitting here thinking like, why would you have this distinctive thing in there? Like, and if you were going to put a trap that you didn't want tied back to you, wouldn't you intentionally remove that distinctive thing?
So for Cardassians, the reason why you would build it in is so you know how this thing mutates, and we kind of bring up the issue of like, wait, if it mutates, couldn't it like quickly affect your population? I think
True.
that's why you would put it in there so that you recognize like, hey, this is something we made. Get us the records on this. We need to fix it right now because
Well,
it's
so
gone out
I
of
guess
hand.
that's true. I mean, I guess that's true. And if that's the case, I would want that to be a line in the episode. You know, like Bashir says, they
Hmm.
always build a distinctive monoclonal. I guess is it really no clone monoclonial, not colonial. It's colonial. I don't know. It's weird. They always build that into the DNA of their viruses. If he followed up with so that they know how to cure it if it gets out of
Hmm.
hand, that would be a better line. But they don't put that line in there. So
Yeah,
I
it's like
mean, we can make the assumption that they do that as a sort of a safety mechanism for themselves. But if that's the case, like I don't know, like maybe it's one of those things where you could also explain that maybe Cardassians have a natural immunity to something that has that type of DNA structure in there, and therefore that all the diseases they make are designed to give themselves immunity, but not other species. Meanwhile,
mhm.
you know, if Bashir looks at the disease and he's like, "Oh yeah, it has something built in it to make Bajorans immune to it prior to it mutating," then it'd be like this was made by Bajorans. That'd be a lot more obvious. But
Yeah, but it doesn't do
immediately
that
after, yeah.
here.
No, it doesn't do that
Um,
here. And again, it could be that what you said, this was the Bajoran resistance. They probably don't have the 100% sophistication to ensure all these
yeah,
things, and this is meant to be a
I think
dangerous trap.
Yeah, I think the situation that happened is more than likely. So they don't have the resources to be completely original with it. What they probably did is before the Cardassians came to the planet, they had dabbled in genetic engineering because
Hmm.
kind of every species does in Star Trek. Even humanity did, and there's the Great Gene Wars. But it's probably a case of like were relying on that old research and basically modifying it to make it a weapon, and that's why it has the telltale signatures that federations have records of. Because it's like, oh, it's something that like Bajorans did in the past, so likely as candidates for being responsible Bajorans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then we get a scene where Kira points out that the due to the degradation of the power core, the device must have been there at the building of the station. So,
Yep.
I mean,
18.
it's an 80-year-old device. That's a
No,
pretty
18.
advanced.
18.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right.
Two decades.
18-year-old. I misread it. 18 years old, and so it's a pretty old device. I mean, it's still old, and
Yeah.
this is where they sort of figure out it was a booby trap, and this is I think where they fully cement the idea. Yeah, it was made by Bajorans. Let's see.
Hmm.
And they're trying to, at this point, they're trying to find the people who 18 years ago would have had the scientific ability to create this sort of thing. And Kira's in charge of looking for that. So she starts like researching the genetic engineers or genetic researchers at that time to try and figure out who made this device so that they could find a cure for it. So
Yeah.
that's what she's doing at that point. And yeah, she contacts someone, uh, but she just keeps coming up to dead ends. No one really wants to give her the information, or no one seems to have the information. Which
Hmm.
again, it was 18 years ago. They had a war in between that time. It kind of makes sense that a lot of leads would probably die off.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
she ends up she's going to end up finding the person later on. But until then, this is where we learn that Jake now has the disease. Cisco goes up to him, and it's a pretty sad scene. I do think Avery Brooks is acting pretty well in showing his grief over his son getting infected. But again,
Yeah.
this scene sometimes it's really challenging to sort of take it seriously, especially like when I was doing the rewatch. I'm like, man, these actors can just not communicate with each other. So it's really hard for
Well,
them to act off each other, and it's like, yeah, I guess you just have to really carry it off of Avery Brooks' ability here because Jake's I can't remember Jake's actor, but he's just not able to say or do anything. He's doing a decent enough job convincing it, but it's as he's saying like gibberish words, so it's almost kind of comical. Oh no, he's so sad, and then
his
he just
name.
starts saying "roll linger, roll linger." Like I'm just like, okay,
so,
I'm almost laughing.
so the actor's name is Sirach Lopton.
Okay,
Sirach.
I guess there's a
Interesting
reason I didn't
first name.
remember it.
Like I've never heard that first name before. It's an interesting first name.
Yeah,
Huh?
but so again, I just think this Babel idea was not doomed from the start, but it's a challenging one, and I don't think the episode fully survives on it. So, I
Yeah.
mean, we get a few more scenes. I mean, we can kind of shotgun some of this because, again, it's just characters trying to solve the problem. I don't know how much is really helping
Yeah.
here. Like, Bashir's talking about how the virus is a work of genius and he can't find a cure himself. All he can do is kind of try and stem the symptoms. And he talks about how unless they counter the virus, O'Brien will be dead within 12 hours. And he's the canary in the coal mine here
But
because he was the first infected.
yep.
So they basically are on this timer of 12 hours. Meanwhile,
Um.
Kira's constantly trying to figure out what's going on. And let's see, is this the part where, yeah, so she calls someone who is immediately like not cooperative. And of course, that's going to be very suspicious to her. So she starts investigating more into this. And eventually, she's going to end up taking one of the runabouts to go pick him up because he just refused to talk about the disease or the virus.
Yeah.
And in a very suspicious way. Like, I don't know if I really want to write it too poorly off, mostly because like I feel if you're trying to hide the fact that you were involved with a ancient like an 18-year-old terrorist plot that's now affecting Starfleet, you probably don't want to be associated with that. But at the
Hmm.
same
Hmm.
time, it's like the way he denies it is like no, and I won't talk about this anymore, and then turns off the call. So it's like
Yeah.
okay, buddy, if you wanted to look suspicious, you did it. Now, that being said, he was surprise called. He is a doctor. He probably wasn't expecting this to be a thing. I can kind of hand wave it away as like, yeah, sure. Like it makes sense why he's being suspicious. He was caught off guard. I'm not gonna harp on that too much. But yeah,
Yeah.
so
He
that's
basically
what
got cold called, and instead of being like a sales pitch, it's like, "Hey, so we know you took part in making this disease." It's like, "No, I didn't. No, I did not." It's like, mm,
yeah, so she pulls
yeah.
up information on him. Again, this is we know that she's now going to pretty much take a ship to go pick him up or try and get him to cooperate in a different way. Oh, and this is the
Hmm.
scene I thought was happening earlier, but this is the nice scene between Quark and Odo, because Quark is playing Dabo by himself, like the saddest thing in the world. It's like, oh, Dabo. Odo goes in, he's like, oh,
Bravo.
Odo goes in, sort of mocks him with any luck, and Quark's like, nah, I haven't won a single spin in hours. Do you want to play? And this is where Odo kind of has to like shyly admit, it's like, well, I wouldn't want to play something like this. It's like, oh, come on. He's like, okay, look, I don't know how to play. And
Yeah.
Cork like kind of makes fun of him. He's like, "You're in here all this time, keeping an eye on me, and you never learned how to gamble." And Odo is just like, "Yeah, no, I don't know how to gamble." Uh,
It's kind of, you would think he would pick up on it. I think he does later on. I think Quark does teach him. But I think Odo should learn it just because it's like if there's ever a case of someone cheating or someone acting strangely at the table, he would notice it and be able to
true,
hone in on that.
true, but I think
Yeah.
part of it is he doesn't really respect for Quark, so I don't think it's almost like a point of pride not to learn his silly little gambling games. That's kind of how I guess I kind of interpreted it. But I also maybe look at
Yeah.
it as we know Odo's an incredibly pragmatic individual. He probably sees this as stupid. That being said, this is a nice conversation because like Quark is like, oh, I could teach you how to play. Because like Quark almost just wants someone to play, and Odo's like, some other time perhaps. Like he doesn't outright say no. So
Hmm.
I don't know. Again, it's a little bit of a nice interaction between these two. And Odo talks about
Hmm.
how he's needed in ops because most of the station is now stricken with aphasia, and they don't have anyone to operate ops. And then he jokingly comments, "Yeah, we don't have enough people to patrol the promenade anyway. So consider this a warning. If anything goes missing, I'm holding you personally responsible." And Quark is like, "Perfectly understandable." Like it's a funny little interaction. Like, hey, I'm keeping an eye on you, even if I'm not actually keeping an eye on you. And he's like, "Yeah, I know, buddy." Again,
Fine now, buddy.
it's more of these scenes where it's like it's this friendly hostility between the two. I don't know how else to describe it, but these two are constantly just at each other's throats, but at the same time, it's almost like all bark and no bite.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
we get a scene. It's a small scene, but I think this is another thing that I think is kind of funny because I'd like to talk more about like the nature of Star Trek technology. The big one being Bashir is constantly going through like all these different data sets to try and figure out some cure if Kira's leads dry up. And
Hmm.
partway through, like we see he starts off very tired, but then eventually he starts getting afflicted with the gibberish. He's not really capable of
Yep.
communicating with. And if you've watched any Star Trek from TNG to this point, you know that the way they always communicate with their computer is they say, "Computer, do this." Computer, analyze this sample. So every time he can't communicate anymore, the computer is no longer able to understand him, and he can't
Hmm.
operate the computer anymore. Now, I don't know if there's a manual way to operate these computers, like a keyboard and mouse, because I don't think we ever really see. I mean, we see some like touch screens and data stuff that they use, but I wonder how much. Like, do you think? I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and say there is a way to get around not being able to actually communicate with the computer. That being said, Bashir can't even read the computer anymore. So he can't get
Yeah,
any information from this. So
yeah. It's
I
at
do
that
think,
point of
yeah.
just like,
And I think this was the
even
point
if
where we were
there's a
talking
way
about,
around.
yeah, this was the point
Go
where we
ahead.
were talking about, yeah, the making it so that everyone can't understand like any language at all is really going to be a huge disruptor in this sort of sci-fi setting because they can't read computers, they can't operate computers, they can't communicate with each other. Again, it's just it doesn't really work. I think as a because it's just it you might as well just make a disease that just kills everybody, like infects everybody, and then after a certain amount of time kills them. But
Yeah.
it's just it is interesting how the way we see people interact with computers is now even being affected. So it really sort of highlights the severity of all of this.
Hmm.
Let's see. Kira's just more and more investigation. She's like saying, yeah, this is the part where she's like, I'm gonna go take the ship, leave the station. She has to basically convince Cisco, like, you can't leave the station because we're in a quarantine. She's like, look, I'll never leave the runabout. Which again, I guess that makes sense. You can do that. It's a risk, but I think you can trust Kira at this point. Let's see.
Hmm.
This is where we get the really nice heartwarming scene between Jake and Cisco, where they can't communicate with one another. I mean, even when you look at the transcript, it's just an entire run on line from Cisco because no one else can interact at this point. We see all these sick
Yeah, it's just
people in,
like,
in beds, and and Jake just can't talk back. So it's just, I mean, again, props to Avery Brooks. He does sell, he does sell this pretty well. But it's one of those things where I think it's a tall order. And we get another
mhm.
scene where Jahil, the guy who was complaining about his cargo, he's trying to leave the station now. And the only people operating ops are Odo and Cisco. Jahil is trying to basically pull his ship away. Cisco has the idea of like, okay, we'll let him go and then we'll grab him in a tractor beam because otherwise he's going to pull off the entire docking ring. However, because he's pulling his ship off, it's causing the docking ring to be jammed.
Mhm.
And as a result, it creates a huge issue. A lot of techno babble, and then the ship like starts doing random explosions. Sort of standard Star Trek. When something goes wrong, consoles and the walls explode.
Yeah, just
But
yeah,
so the station is now pretty much under attack because not under attack, but the station is now endangered by this virus because this guy is so paranoid about being infected, and he needs to go because his cargo is going to be destroyed. And he's going to lose his like all his money basically because I imagine if he's a cargo guy, this is his livelihood. It's not just a matter
yeah.
of he just wants the money from the cargo. I'm like, I don't know, man. Like if you know anything about like farmers or like big cargo shipments, they take out like massive debt to do these operations. And the whole point is the debt funds the operation, which you then use the money from that operation to pay the debt back. So if
Yeah.
he doesn't do this cargo shipment, he might not really have a future. He's desperate, but he's also afraid of being sick. I do think they give this. I mean, this is a side character who we never see again. They give him decent motivation. Like they don't skimp out. He's not just an asshole who's endangering everybody. He has his own motivations. He's afraid of the disease. He's afraid for his future, and all of his crew is sick, but he's fine still. So he's desperately trying to flee, causes damage to the station accidentally. But he acts a little bit stupid here. But again, you can kind of give it to the show. They do highlight his panic at least enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
let's see. Da-da-da. Oh, uh, this is where we get what I really like is a scene. So Kira basically flies to the planet where this doctor is, and she's like, "Look, I'm gonna give you one last time. Please tell me about this virus." He's refusing. So she then uses the transporter and pulls him on the ship.
You're
And I find
yeah.
yeah, I find this funny because he's still mad, and she's like, "Look, you need to fix." He's like, "I'm telling you, I don't know what to do." He's like, "Well, then you better still help because guess what? I'm infected, and now so are you."
Yeah.
Like Kira, this is a pretty big Hail Mary move for her because in all fairness, if this guy honestly did not know, then she just basically
Yeah.
like sentenced this man to death on a
Yeah.
guess. It's a very accurate guess. I think there's a lot supporting it, but it's still a pretty Hail Mary move. It's kind of like, look, I'm going to risk infecting you so that I'm gambling that you do know the answer. And then this is where he finally has to kind of admit, okay, look, I did work on it, but there's no cure. It was meant to be used against
Mhm.
Cardassians. And she's like, well, then you better help us develop one.
Which, you know, it's an episode. They're gonna find the cure because otherwise it's like, oh, we need a whole new cast and setting. But it's like, huh,
Yeah, I
you
mean that's
figured that
another
out quick.
that's another issue, and that's a little bit speaking to the meta about this, like the fact that this is very much just like a one-off episode. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, once you put the entire crew in danger, I as a viewer almost know, okay, there's not really any danger here then, because the entire crew dying is not feasible for a TV show. Unironically, if they had just left it at maybe like a few background characters and O'Brien, I'd be a lot more worried
Hmm.
for probably O'Brien because you they could have killed off O'Brien.
Yeah,
And
could have
I mean,
done
this
it.
this episode does a pretty decent job. I mean, the past few episodes, O'Brien has a little bit of a role in every episode. So imagine if you had 3 or 4 episodes just building up this, character from TNG who is, probably a tertiary character in TNG, and here he's basically a main character, a secondary character. You build him up a lot over a few episodes, then you kill him off. You could have easily done that and had a lot of people really like applauding that. But when you put the entire crew in danger, you're sitting there like, okay, but like really, we know that they're not
It's
all in danger.
it's like that joke from South Park when they have the casino and the everyone in town gets infected because they want to bulldoze the town, and Randy's like, "Ah, if this continues on, only 98% of us will survive." It's like, yeah,
Ugh, God.
yeah,
But again, it's just it's one of those things where it's a little bit of meta knowledge. It's a little bit of not really buying into what the episode's
mistakes.
trying to sell me. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's not poor writing. A lot of shows do that. I think it's fine for a one-off, but it's kind of when it comes to DS9, where we're going to see a lot more continuing consequences for things, and we're already seeing
Hmm.
some of that. It's like this episode really kind of doesn't do that, and again, this is why this episode's kind of skippable. This is where we see
Hmm.
Cisco. He's now sick, and this basically leaves Odo in charge of ops slowly. Although there is a scene I really do kind of like. Let's see. I want to see if I can get the exact dialogue for it. Where, let's see. Oh, I mean, so Cisco gives an order to Odo. He says, "I'll do it," and then he tries to give more, but he can't communicate. And the way Odo's actor, Rene Desjoie, I don't know if I pronounced that French name back poorly, but the way he says, like, what was that? And then this is where it's confirmed that Cisco can't communicate. And Odo says a very nice way. He says, like, ah, I see. Like, I like this because,
Mm.
in a way, he clearly doesn't understand what Cisco is saying, but,
Yeah.
he's basically saying, like, ah, yes, I'm the only one here now. And it's
I'm all
like,
alone.
as far as he kind of knows, like he knows Kira's out there, but he doesn't know if Kira's going to be successful. As far as he knows, he's the last person who can save the day or protect the station. And I
Hmm.
don't know, it's a nice line. I think it's delivered very well. I think the acting is really on par. I mean, again, we were saying it before. Quark and Odo are kind of standouts in this episode, even if a lot of the
Yeah.
characters kind of can't communicate. The fact that the one character who can communicate from beginning to end is one of the standout characters makes sense.
Yeah. There's also an interesting thing with Odo in particular. It's like, oh, yeah, the guy who's always been alone and started forming connections with people. Oh, all those connections are in danger now because he can't communicate with them and they might die. It's like, like, oh, back to square one for you, Odo.
Yeah,
You're gonna
and this is,
suffer.
and Odo is basically trying to find someone on the station who's not infected to help him here, and this is where Quark enters the scene. I detect a note
Quark
of
to the
panic in your
rescue.
voice. Like this is where we get Quark and Odo commanding the station together. Uh,
Uh,
this is actually really funny because like Quark is like, look, it's like I'm like to believe you're volunteering for help, and Quark's like, volunteering? No, we're haggling over a price. How can I be of use?
well, he
Like
says
the
later we can haggle over price.
Yeah, but it's just
Later.
like the station is damaged because of the ship. The virus is killing people. Quark is still haggling.
Of
Really, just
course.
the definition of his life. He'd be the person selling, the end is nigh signs if a meteor was about to hit a planet.
He's the 80s guy from Futurama. He's just like, friendship to me means I bust your kneecaps with a baseball bat. It's like that's Quark. Like he's
Well, I
not
mean,
quite to that
I think
level.
Yeah, Quark's not that cutthroat, but he's definitely a guy who
Yeah.
puts his own interests priority. So Odo basically is
Yeah.
like, look, Odo's basically. Oh, we do get this scene, which is funny. So Odo needs to be beamed over to docking port 5 because I suppose that's the fastest way to get there. Quark's like, yeah, I can
Hmm.
do it. Odo's like, wait, you know how to operate this? He's like, relax, I worked on a Ferengi freighter for 8 years. So Odo's like, all right. And then as Quark is going through the procedure, he's like, I must have seen the procedure 100 times. Odo's just like, wait, witnessed?
Witness.
And then that's when Quark's like, energize, and he says it with such smug. I want to see if I can actually like get it on the scene. Let's see here. because it's funny.
Uh,
Let's see.
well, no. Odo specifically says like witness. You mean you to say
Witnessed.
you never
You've
handled the
taken
controls
over
yourself? Energizing.
handled the
It's
controls
like,
And then
oh,
it's
yourself.
just hold on. I
Health.
want to see if we can get Quark's.
Energize.
it's
Yep, there it
glee.
is. He's just like smiling as he is potentially dooming Odo to death. Energizing again. Quark, he and Odo, they very much straddle that line between friend and mortal enemy. But that being said, Odo is beamed over successfully, no issues, and he's able to sort of save the captain from that ship, pull him out of the fire. Which again, I do like that. I do like the fact that yeah, this guy endangered your station. And instead of prioritizing just saving the station, you're also prioritizing saving his life.
Yeah, if Quark had
That's
been
what these
sent over
officers do.
there, yeah, if
Well,
Quark
yeah,
had been sent over, it's like, yeah, just eject it. But Odo is like would always
yeah,
like get as
yeah,
many as
because
possible.
they're trying to get the ship off the station, or basically like allow it to be ejected off. But at the same time, Odo's like, yeah, we got to save this guy as well. Let's see. Oh yeah. At one point, Odo picks up Jahil, and Jahil's just like dog follow distance, and Odo's like, "Yeah, tell me about it." I, I don't know. I don't know what that's supposed to be, but it's just funny. It's a little silly. Let's see. They have some tense parts where Quark is basically giving them the countdown timer. Ships could explode in 1 minute. I guess they had the ship exploder timer on because you can kind of see that. Quark is like 40 seconds, and Odo's basically they're racing against time. It's pretty substantial, but they managed to jettison the ship as it explodes, and the station's safe. That being said, there is a point where Quark, the ship has been ejected, but Quark doesn't know the status of Odo just yet, so he's actually like concerned. Quark, or like he goes Odo, Quark to Odo. He seems panicked, like he wants a response, asking if he's still with them, and Odo is basically trying to say like, don't sound too disappointed. And then of course the next thing Quark says is, so about my hazard pay. And it's funny because I'm looking at the transcript here. The episode just ends really quickly after this. They do a station log where Cisco basically narrates the end of the episode. Oh yeah, by the way, with Bashir's notes and working together, they were able to cure the disease, and everyone's fine now. I'm like,
That's
okay.
fine.
Let's
And
see.
then ends on replica coffee black, drinks it. I'm right. Just
Yep. Oh, Cisco tries to get a coffee again, and the replicator's broken. Yells out for Chief. Which again, I think they make that point. I can't remember if it's this episode or previous episode where Cisco always calls him Chief. As a term of endearment, but also just as a, again, it's sort of mutual respect, right? Like he's speaking to him like a chief, like someone who's in charge. Because as far as like Cisco kind of looks at it, O'Brien's kind of in charge of the day-to-day operations of keeping the station running. And then,
yeah.
of course, in the standard O'Brien fashion, his work is never done, and he has to go fix the replicators again. And that's the end of the episode. That is our shortest breakdown yet. It's still an hour, but
Yeah.
again, part of the
Does
issue
this
is,
count as a just a quick question. Does this count as an O'Brien must suffer episode technically?
yeah. I mean, he's the first to get infected. He's the closest to dying. I think this is what the first major instance of O'Brien must suffer.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Anyways, back
But
to what you're saying.
well, so all I was saying was, I mean, overall, the episode has really good cause and effect. I think they do a lot of time setting things up. I think this is a very good TNG episode.
Yeah.
And I think, but in terms of DS9, it's so skippable. It's unfortunate. And again, I do think there is a degree of we lose out a lot on the actors not being able to communicate for most of the episode. I know I've said
Yeah.
that at this point like 3 or 4 times, but I think it's the biggest thing hindering this episode from being great. I don't even know if I would consider it good. I'd consider it decent. Like if you like Star Trek, if you like DS9, this is a watchable episode. But if someone was asking me, hey, I want to like consume the most amount of like DS9 in the shortest amount of time, like if I had to give them like a very abridged version and like recommend specific episodes per season, this would definitely
hmm
not be on that list. We
Oh
have
yeah,
another
no.
episode. We have another episode coming up. In let's see, 5 more episodes until we get to move along home. So this isn't on the
Uh,
level. This is nowhere near the level of Move Along Home. In fact, I do think episode 7 of this season isn't as is probably worse than this episode. But I think
uh,
in terms of standout, O'Brien's pretty decent early on, and then we get Odo and
hmm,
Quark. Everything else is more or less standard fare. So I'm going to give it a solid C. It's not bad. It's not good. It's not. It's decent.
hmm
What's
hmm
and I just think like I think it could probably be a little bit better. I think it might have helped if you don't have so many of your main actors not being able to communicate. At the same time, I guess it is kind of nice to see that they're showing that the command crew is not immune to the effects of the station. You could see a similar episode. There might be some TNG episodes that do a similar thing where something's affecting the ship, and they talk about how all the civilian crew on the ship or some of the no-name crew are getting infected, or how the no-name crew are being affected by a threat, whereas the main cast, is still fully capable of communicating and working together. Here, they're like, well, no, like the main commanding officers are also being affected. They're also being knocked out. They're not immune to the consequences, and they need to save themselves just as much as they need to save everyone else. I think
Mhm.
it's good to probably show that, but I just think using the babble as the inability to communicate is the biggest hindrance to this whole episode, and that's
Yeah.
it's a pretty big hindrance though. So overall, I mean, it's having talked about it, I might give it like a C plus. I might say it's good and there's some good things in it. I just don't think it's above that. I don't think I can justify a B considering some of the better episodes we're going to have coming forward. So, but
I
yeah,
put it as
overall,
just a C.
yeah, I mean, overall, I
Just
think we're mostly in agreement. I think overall this is a very good episode, and yeah, I mean, that's probably all we need to say for now. Short episode. We're just at an hour, so quickly, Pike, say something meaningful to close out this episode.
so DS9